Hello, everybody. I'm Fred Cook, the host of the PR Future podcast that comes to you live from the USC Center for Public Relations. Today, my guests are Michael Sullivan and Lindsey Bastani from We Communications. We have conducted 3 years of research with We about how AI is impacting the public relations business. And today, we're going to talk about the latest trend, which could be the biggest thing that's happened to PR since search. And that's called GEO. And it's about how you manage your brand on an LLM today and tomorrow to make sure that your reputation is correct and protected for the long term. Hello and welcome to PR Future, the podcast from the University of Southern California Center for Public Relations. And welcome. Today I'm here live at USC with my two guests from We Communications, Michael Sullivan and Lindsey Bastani. As you know, we have done 3 years of research with We, all about AI. And we're going to talk about the latest research in just a few minutes. But Michael, why don't you give us a little background on what we've learned over the 3 years in these 3 different studies about AI and its impact on public relations?
Sure. So the first study that we did together was really short after the launch of ChatGPT. I think it was only 5 months after ChatGPT had come out. So we were really first to ask communicators, what's your reaction to this technology? How do you feel about it? And the title of that report was Fascinated and Frightened, which I think really captured the feel at the time. People didn't know what to make of this new thing that could write really credibly and really quickly. And it kind of freaked communicators out because that's, the core of our job. So then 18 months pass, we do a second report and really try to get a gauge for people have had a lot more hands-on time with these technologies, been able to integrate it into some of their communications workflows. So how are they feeling 18 months later? And what we found was really interesting. At that time, about a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, we found that communications teams that were working really heavily in AI technologies were 90% more likely to say that they felt valued for the work that they were doing. So that showed us that there was a really specific culture mandate for trying to embrace these tools. If you want a communications team that's really engaged, that feels really valued at work, it was proof positive you need to start integrating these tools into your everyday workflows. Now, in our third report, so a year after that, it was published last November, and it was really laser focused on GEO, or Generative Engine Optimization, which is basically in a world where people who are accessing brand communications are no longer clicking to a press release or a blog post, but they're just going straight to an AI tool and saying, hey, what's the latest news from so-and-so? Then your entire message is filtered through that new gatekeeper. And what does that mean for our craft? How are communicators starting to think about that and integrate monitoring of these tools the same way that we monitor social media conversations or earned media conversations? And really, how are we getting out ahead of being the stewards of message when message is now coming through a new spokesperson?
Right. So AI becomes the corporate spokesperson in many cases. And you had some interesting statistics. 62% of communicators say that GEO, Generative Engine Optimization, represents the biggest opportunity in communications since search. But nearly half say they have no idea where to begin.
Yeah.
How do you address that?
You begin by educating yourself. A lot of us are learning as we build the plane, right? So this includes monitoring how these AI tools are talking about your brand, are talking about your sector, seeing what sources the tools are pulling from to gather its information. Maybe those are new sources that you should be prioritizing for pitching, or maybe they're instructive for how you should be structuring your own content so that you gain more authority in these tools.
What do you find, what do people, when they say they don't understand, what are the main misconceptions PR people have about artificial intelligence?
Do you want me to jump in here, Mike?
Yeah, please, Lindsey.
Lindsey, when we talk about PR and AI working together, and people seem to have a lack of knowledge, what are the misconceptions that you think PR people have about using AI?
One of the big misconceptions is this idea that everything in communications and marketing is going to be outsourced to digital bot sources. And the idea that the human in the loop is really only either a prompter or a reviewer. But I think what the research and our experience shows is the humans have an increasingly important role as these tools start becoming communicators on our behalf. One of the stats that really stuck out to me from this year's survey is that 55% of communicators haven't even had the conversation internally yet about how to address GEO. A human convening conversation that needs to happen that above and beyond the digital aspect of it. And then I think using these tools not just as a mouthpiece, but as a roadmap to some of the really human aspects of communicating that are still important today. We worked with a brand that was addressing some mis and disinformation about their brand story through digital tools. And the roadmap of that ultimately led us to local market government officials and in-person engagement as the way to influence back up the story of the brand. So that human role is actually more vital than ever, and that can be a common misconception.
Is part of the equation is understanding where these LLMs get their information and what sources they pull from. Michael, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Muckrack recently put out a report that we actually referenced in the piece of research that we put out that showed how much these tools were relying on owned content and earned content to help define their answers, especially when people were asking about recent information. So if the question implied recency, nearly half of the sources that AI was pulling from were authoritative earned news sources, which is really instructive for us as communicators because it tells us these are the outlets that you should start pitching. These are the outlets that sometimes have outsized impact on these results. So I found in a lot of the GEO auditing work that I've been doing is some of the outlets that carry great authority in AI are not necessarily the ones that you'd expect. But it's a shifting target also because we're seeing license agreements happening between Axios and Vox and different platforms with the AI tools themselves. And so those outlets now are going to gain greater authority and be cited more often in these results. And that's really instructive for us as, where do we want to, what kind of journalists is it higher or lower value to develop relationships with, knowing that what they ultimately write about us and the accuracy of what they write about us is going to become more paramount in these tools.
So GEO is really at the center of public relations, or public relations is the center of GEO.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just in earned, also in owned. So we see if a question is asked about a specific brand, more often than not, that brand's blog or that brand's news release is going to be cited somewhere in the response. So that, the press release is coming back in a really weird way because these tools give a lot of authority to official press releases. Mm-hmm. We used to say, I remember 5 years ago, we were saying the press release is dead. Yeah. Nobody's going to issue them anymore. Now they carry so much outsized authority that it's coming back.
Does it matter whether the press release has been printed in a publication, or is it just the press release itself that is drawn upon?
The press release crossing a wire service. So it being published through a PR newswire, those sorts of things have new authority that they didn't have before.
Either one of you, how many brands do you think are now monitoring their image on LLMs? Is that commonplace, or is that
the research shows that, half of them don't even know where to start. So I would put my estimation of who's actually taking action on it somewhere in that ballpark or lower. And that really is, the monitoring is the place to start. You can't influence and shape what you can't measure. So there's a lot of light lift ways to do this. If you want to just start asking the LLMs questions about your brand, your competitive set, use it in the voice that your customer would use to ask a question and do it several times over because you will get different answers each time. That will give you a baseline for how you're showing up. And then you can systematize that, bring on tools. We use something called GEO Compass, and that becomes that roadmap for how to influence from that point.
How often do you monitor? Is it an ongoing process, or is it once a day or once a week, or how does it work?
It's ongoing in the same way that social media monitoring or earned media monitoring is ongoing. So we found that the AI tools there tends to be a full shift in what they're tracking in a specific sector about once a month. So that shows that you need to be on top of these things all the time because the different outlets and their different authority it's a moving target and it's shifting constantly. So if you're not watching these things as closely as you do any other kind of monitoring, then something that was true 6 months ago might not be true today. We also did ask in the survey, to your earlier question about how many enterprises are doing this. So when we asked the communicators that we surveyed, are you tracking these things in a meaningful way? 23% said that they are currently tracking how well they're showing up in these AI tools. So it's a little under a quarter. 31% said that they're planning to do so. 30% said that they're not planning to do so, but they should be. And then 17% said, hey, we have no plan at all.
Right.
So that's, almost 1 in 5 communicators are saying this isn't even on our radar right now.
So this is something that's brand new or very new.
Yeah.
What's the difference between SEO and GEO in terms of the public relations role in this?
That's a great question. They are very interrelated in that outlets that have authority in page ranking tend to also have authority in AI tools. So you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you've been doing a lot of really good work in SEO, you can't take your foot off the gas. That being said, SEO largely became the domain of the marketing practice, not so much the domain of communicators. Whereas GEO, because so much of it relies on earned and owned content, it's a huge opportunity for us as communicators to take some domain expertise in a place that is much more squarely within our sphere of influence.
That's great. That's really interesting. I teach a class in AI, and we work with a lot of different tools here at USC. You came to the class and spoke, and we talked about the differences between all the different LLMs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's thousands of them right now, but there are 3 or 4 that are really popular. Can you talk about which ones are used the most often and what differences might be between them in terms of how they source information and what they give back?
Sure. There used to be a lot more daylight between them because the kinds of data sources that they could access were really different. So Copilot, because it's built into M365, it had a lot more access to your Word documents and your PowerPoint files. Claude, for a while, couldn't search the internet. Now that all of them, pretty much all of the frontier models have access to the open internet, they are largely pulling from many of the same data sources. We know that in corporate environments, Copilot has done a really good job gaining a foothold because of its seamless integration into a lot of existing Microsoft Suite tools. But when I get asked all the time, what's the best model for communicators? The answer is all of them. You need to stay up to date on everything, be fluent in all of them. The fortunate thing is the underlying principles for these different tools, how to prompt them, things like that, are pretty universal across the board because they're built on the same underlying technology. So if you're staying sharp in one, you're pretty sharp in all of them. But if you have access to all of them, now that's another piece, is within a secure enterprise environment, obviously, you have an IT apparatus and you have legal and you have all of these controls over what you can and can't use within your enterprise environment. And that's going to be, different for different communicators in different places. But to the extent that you can access different tools and get different answers, I always tell this when I lecture classes like the one that I was at with yours. While you're a student and you have the ability to use all of these tools, use all of them. Ask the same question to 3 or 4 different models and then pick and choose the parts of the answers that you like, especially if you're using it for a writing assignment as an effective communicator. You get to play that editor and that curator and pull little pieces from here and there to construct the response that you really like.
And can you use all of them for free for a limited amount of time or a limited amount of work?
Most of them do have a free platform to engage with. And so, again, like students in an academic environment do have the free ability to use several of them, but certainly your ability to get more in-depth answers or faster answers is going to be unlocked through paid tiers.
And what have our surveys shown about which are the most popular right now, would you say?
We didn't ask usage in this most recent survey, I don't believe, but a year ago, it really showed that Copilot is taking a really good foothold, I think for a lot of the reasons that I just described, which is people really trust Microsoft's security apparatus. Microsoft is very well integrated into so many enterprises already, and it was the one that just seamlessly works with everything already.
And is it based on ChatGPT?
It uses the same underlying LLM as ChatGPT, yes.
All right, good. Yeah. Let's talk about the PR people a little bit more. Lindsey, what do you think they're worried about as they approach this new AI world?
One of the big sources of tension that I hear from communicators is that we love language. We love storytelling and writing in narrative form. And is that craft that we've grown up in going away in a world where we have to engineer everything that we put out for a machine to scrape it? And so where that dialogue brings us back to something that Michael was talking about earlier is having an awareness of which of the earned outlets are influencing the different LLMs can be the bridge where we can still tell those meaningful stories. It's still working with a reporter to tell a very human impact story in a way that's going to rise up its visibility within the LLM, and then surrounding that with a content strategy that is really machine friendly. And then you kind of get that holistic storytelling piece coming through.
Do you think people can tell when something has been developed using AI as opposed to not using it at all?
I think people are getting savvier and savvier about this. For the last year, there's been a lot of jokes and lamenting about M dashes and Oxford commas. So we're still working through that. That kind of discernment about between just what is AI slop and then using it as a tool to create something that's actually going to resonate with your audience. That's one of the human skills that's going to become even more in demand going forward.
And one of the concerns we saw in the survey was this worry about misinformation, disinformation.
Yeah.
How common is that with the current AI tools? Do you see a lot of hallucinations and incorrect information?
Hallucinations certainly are still happening. I encounter them quite often. So we still encourage all of our employees as they're working with these AI tools that they are the person who's ultimately responsible for the veracity of the things that they're producing. They have to fact check everything. But to your point, misinformation, we asked a lot of questions specific to some anxieties that communicators have. Lindsey mentioned so much of our practice is about carefully curated messaging and wording, and those are really dear to us, and we want to make sure that that carefully curated messaging is reflected correctly. But AI is not a parrot. It is very often a rephraser. So definitionally, those words are going to change in translation, and that can be really scary for us as people who really craft. We asked a lot of questions in the survey about anxieties related to AI, and not all of them made it into the final report, but I have them in front of me, so I can give you some exclusives about.
Do.
So majorities in the high 50s and low 60% agreed with all of these statements. We are concerned about having limited control over how AI represents our brand. We are concerned AI may misrepresent our brand or values. The idea of AI generating inaccurate or outdated content about our brand worries me. We think the rise of AI-generated content poses new threats to corporate reputation management. I have a good story about that in a minute. AI could amplify negative narratives and misinformation about my organization. I think the negative narratives piece is really huge because everything that happens about your brand is now part of the permanent record that AI can draw from constantly. It's the same way that when a celebrity has had a controversy, it lives on their Wikipedia page forever. Now that Wikipedia page is a dynamic interface that people can access through ChatGPT or Google at any time. We worry that search engines powered by AI may distort carefully curated brand messaging. That's the parrot versus translator thing I was just talking about. And then we believe stakeholders might trust AI over official corporate communications, which is a hugely valid fear because even in our own survey, we asked younger communicators versus older communicators if they trusted stuff that they read in AI more or less than stuff that they heard from colleagues or from the New York Times. And we found that even communicators, early in career communicators, believed that AI results had greater authority than something that they might have read in the New York Times.
But you can't correct AI. You can't correct an LLM, can you? The same way you can Wikipedia if they have something wrong?
I mean, you can correct it by putting out correct information through the right channels. So the best work that you can do is see where the incorrect information came from and correct the record there. So if it's an outlet that has published something wrong, the same way that you would reach out to that reporter and try to correct the record through them directly, it's the same thing that you would do.
So if they change the source of the information changes their story,
yeah,
the AI will change
because it's pulling the live information from that source. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that has changed the calculus quite a bit, or increased the importance of just that traditional PR ground game, because in the past, if you had a slight piece of misinformation, but it wasn't in a particularly prominent outlet, you might not have the time, energy, or resources to go correct every single one. But in a world where that outlet may happen to have outsized impact on an LLM because of the way it's written, really factually driven, bullets and things like that, then it becomes really important and paramount to go correct the record. So the ground game becomes important. I think, Michael, underlying all those statistics you talked about of the fear and concern of trusting AI, even over official corporate channels, is the stakes of it and the why. And that's because research is showing that if a buyer, a customer is going to go shortlist, who they're the vendors they're going to buy from, AI is becoming the top source. So it's directly impacting sales. So again, when I sit down with communicators and we start to have this conversation, it usually starts with, oh my gosh, what now? What do I need to do? And it usually ends in excitement of realizing this light bulb that communications is the lever that can have that impact on how your customers are reading about your story or understanding your brand, because the earned and the owned channels are such big feeders and influencers of it.
Well, if we take that one step further, we always looked at PR's share of voice, how much of the media coverage was about your brand versus other brands, and it was either higher or lower. How do you measure AI share of voice, and how can you impact that?
So Lindsey mentioned it earlier, but we have a product at our firm called GEO Compass that is basically the kind of ongoing monitoring that you would want to do for social media or for earned media. We do the same thing for AI. So what that's doing is basically querying the leading models a list of prompts about your brand and about your sector. So some of the questions are not about your brand, they're just unbranded about your sector. And it's querying these models every single day and tracking who's showing up more than who else and how and what outlets are having the most authority in affecting that ranking.
And so you can look at a fast food chain. You can compare to other fast food chains.
Absolutely, yeah.
See who's getting the most attention.
Yep.
Or do you just ask questions like who is the best? Where's the best hamburger?
Both. Yeah, all the above.
Lindsey, what were you going to say?
And then when you look at a communications program and tracking your KPIs, it's a new layer. So you're not just asking, all right, we had our big keynote moment. How much coverage did we land, or how much share of voice did we land compared to the competition? You're asking, how did this big moment that we just landed shape what the LLM is saying about my brand, so that you're constantly shaping that new brand voice that is in the mix for you.
It's so interesting. And back to SEO versus GEO, what does the shift from search to AI look like? I see all the search engines now have the AI component that pops up, this AI summary, as opposed to clicking on the links. How's that changing?
Yeah, so in 2024, Gartner put out a report saying that they expect search volume to decrease by a quarter by 2026 because of AI summaries like the one you just mentioned. Well, it's now 2026. So we're quickly approaching that reality where people are going to something like Google, they're getting their question answered by that AI summary at the top, and they never click a link, which means they never get through to your own content. They never even get through to your earned content. That we're calling zero-click search. It's a huge change of the landscape for the publishers themselves, most of whom have revenue models that are really, really dependent on getting that click. But it's also changing the rules of the road for us, because if people are getting everything that they need from that AI summary, then we want to make sure that the AI summary is pulling from the latest and greatest. And like I said earlier, a lot of that is hand in hand with search, because PageRank does factor pretty significantly into what shows up in that box at the top.
Do you think there's a time in the future where AI is going to have those financial incentives as well, so you can move your information up higher than someone else if you pay?
The frontier models are looking at all different sorts of ways of monetization, whether it's sponsored information in AI search results. We haven't seen a ton of that yet, but I do think they're already getting some affiliate revenue from if you click through the result and go on to purchase a product. Mm-hmm. The same way that publishers get affiliate monetization through recommendations that they make within an article.
It's going to be interesting to see where all that goes.
Yeah.
What about, we talked also mentioned in the survey about crisis management, AI as a tool for crisis management. Do you see that as being a high priority right now in public relations or not?
addressing LLMs is a really big priority within crisis communications because it's a whole other voice out there speaking on your behalf. And it's a whole other roadmap that you need to have visibility into so you can quickly make decisions. And I think the timing becomes really important when you're going to decide to weigh in and correct an issue based on the confluence of events in the landscape that's happening around you. So it really has to be done against the backdrop of bigger reputation. And we've seen some brands start experimenting with new ways to kind of shift the paradigm of how that would work within crisis communications. Michael, I know there's an example we've been talking about.
So I don't know if you caught this story early in the year, but there was a Reddit post that was going viral of a food delivery brand. Somebody who claimed to be an employee from a food delivery brand was basically saying that on the back end, the algorithm was doing all sorts of things like trying to measure a driver's, quote unquote, desperation score to offer them different monetization percentages based off of how desperate they thought the driver was. Things that were pretty abhorrent that none of these delivery brands would want to be associated with. And Casey Newton ultimately wound up reporting on this and how it was all fake. The employee was not a real employee of a delivery service. He manufactured his credentials using AI tools. He manufactured the report that showed the back end of these algorithm changes. So all of it was fake. But even before the word of the fraud had come out, while the Reddit post was still going viral, the CEO of DoorDash came out and said, hey, not us, right? Which is not something that we would typically do in the old rules of the road from a crisis perspective. Normally, especially since the Reddit post didn't specify which company it was, a prudent crisis communicator might say, okay, hang back, don't jump in the fray yet. Let's see if they make any more specific accusations, or let's wait to see if this picks up steam. But DoorDash decided that because it was anywhere within their sphere of reputation, they were going to be first to say, hey, that's not us, because we see this as an advantageous comms opportunity to create distance between what we stand for and some of the scummier aspects of the industry that we operate in. And we thought that was really interesting as a case study for how to approach crisis in a reality where people can create fraudulent documentation that looks pretty credible, that claims to be from, brand A or brand B. When anyone has that at their fingertips, how soon do you jump in on a controversy, and how do you calibrate that decision in this environment?
And that's changing.
It's changing, yeah.
One other piece that really stood out from this year's survey to me is that 43% of communicators don't really know whose mandate it is to solve those issues when they arise. So I think this is a chance for communications to step up within the organization and really be the convener, pointing out this new threat landscape, being the leader in monitoring it and escalating when things are going wrong, and having a preventative playbook in place ahead of that so that comms can lead.
Speaking of leadership, I think that AI does provide a big opportunity for comms departments and PR agencies to lead this conversation inside companies. Do you think that as an industry, we're taking full advantage of that, or do you think we're lagging behind a little bit in terms of embracing the AI?
I think the race is on. I think everybody was really tempted when LLMs first hit the scene to talk about how it applies to marketing. And then what this GEO research shows us is that, again, communications is often the lever that's really impacting this zero-click search that's impacting customer perceptions and sales. So I would say we're halfway there. People are starting to take action. But the idea that communicators need to take action and lead on this has, doubled year over year in what they expect for themselves.
So we're keeping up with the pace of change, you think?
I think your mileage may vary.
That one for a minute.
Some are,
yeah,
I think
mileage may vary.
Some are and some aren't.
What would you say to the ones who are not embracing AI or are still reluctant to add that to their toolbox?
I think the nice thing is that you can start small and grow, right? These tools are broadly available to pretty much anybody with an internet connection. And so if you don't know where to begin, you can begin just by starting to search about your own brand, your client's brand, the sector that they operate in, these sorts of audits, and write down, longhand, how often are they mentioned? What sources are they pulling from? You can do a lot of this stuff on your own without fancy tooling or anything. Granted, there are fantastic tools out there now that can automate a lot of this process and do it at scale in a much more comprehensive way than an individual could. But the barrier to entry is ankle high. Anybody can begin right today auditing this space, making note of the sources that have great authority, and then using that to inform an earned strategy that allows them to reach out to different outlets and try to start building authority that way.
It's interesting. I did a podcast with Frank Shaw, who's head of communications at Microsoft, and asked him a question about training. How do you get trained on AI in the best way? Thinking he would say Microsoft does training and we do it for everybody. But he said, he didn't say that. He said, you have to teach yourself.
Yeah.
He said, it's changing so fast that you have to be curious enough to go out there and find what's happening.
I want to be clear. If Microsoft doesn't want to do training, we do training. I'm happy to train people in these tools. But yeah, what's cool about AI relative to, so a lot of the tools that I got really steeped in when I started working in PR were, they were built on Boolean. And more to the point, each of them had different operators relative to one another.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a matter of learning how to speak to computers in that kind of linear calculus sort of way, but you had to learn how this tool did it a little bit differently than this tool did it a little bit differently than this tool, and how the output was different and how to make sense of that output. And it required a lot of time and hands-on time and expertise. The beauty with these tools is now that we've moved past Boolean, it's very conversational. If I want to get intelligence out of a machine now, I just ask it the question the exact same way that I would ask you, that I would ask a colleague, that I would ask a friend. It's just regular sentences. And so the barrier to comprehension, the barrier to working with a lot of these systems has essentially gone away. And I think that's a lot also why you see, unlike other technologies where adoption usually starts really early in career and then kind of trickles up, or you have a reverse mentorship situation where people who are young in their career are teaching, veterans of communications. You're seeing this rollout is a lot more egalitarian. You're seeing a lot of people who've been in the communications industry 30, 40 years, and a lot of people who are just starting kind of on the same playing field, which is really cool.
It's different than social media, because
Totally.
Social media started with the young, and we hired all young people because they lived in that world.
Mm-hmm.
But AI sort of hit everybody at the same pace.
Yeah.
I will say that Frank did create an online program with LinkedIn to train people on AI. So I haven't taken it yet, but I'm sure it's very good. Given that situation, do you see a difference of engagement by generation with older people or younger people embracing AI more than the other generation?
We did notice that there were specific generational gaps in communicators about whether or not they were taking proactive moves to structure activities for AI legibility, AI visibility, things like that. So the statement, my organization structures our tactics to optimize for AI visibility. Communicators 18 to 34 said 63% of them said that they do, and only 51% of all communicators believe so. So there is this belief that younger communicators are thinking more proactively about how to engage in these AI tools, but they may not have the same visibility across the enterprise that, a more senior communicator might have.
It's going to be interesting. I talked to some of my students about it, and they said that they have some concerns about AI that may not be shared by older people. And one of them is that it may take jobs away from them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a legitimate issue. And also there's some ethical issues about its use of electricity and water and that kind of thing that's bothersome.
And I think, another thing that you brought up the last time we talked about this is some of them see it as cheating, especially because so much of our work is in communications. It feels like a shortcut to have AI help you with that communications. But one of the things that I talk to a lot of, especially college level communicators about, is that we're all better editors than we are writers. Many communicators, even communicators whose profession is to write, have trouble with the blank page problem, where you open a Word document and you see a blinking black cursor and an empty white page, and you say, I don't know what to do with this.
Right.
But if the AI can, write that first draft press release for you, kick out 8 paragraphs, those 8 paragraphs are probably going to be bad. But you can read it and say, okay, I know this is bad, but at least it's giving me the structure of where I want certain things to fall, and I can improve upon that.
Okay, Lindsey, a question for you. When you're interviewing people to come work at We, how important is AI knowledge and experience when you're thinking about hiring them?
I think right now it's just really a proxy for what matters the most, which is curiosity and resiliency and agility. Those are the things that I'm really looking for in building a team. This is a moment where we don't know what this job is going to look like 2, 3, 5 years from now. So we have to be putting together a team of people who doesn't just have their heads down on the day to day, but really has their eyes out in the horizon line of where the industry is going, how storytelling and influence is changing, and just those kind of quick twitch, game ready muscles to jump in and try it, get on the field and try the different new tools. So it's really about screening for aptitude more in that behavior more than aptitude in the skills themselves.
That's a great answer and probably a good place to stop. I think that we don't know what's going to happen over the course of the next year, the next 2 years. We've seen a lot of change in the last 3 that we've been doing this survey. So I think we'll have to do another survey next year to find out what's going on. And because it's such a rapid pace of change, that's hard to keep up. And I think a lot of people in our survey noted that's one of the things that scares them about AI is how fast it's changing. So we'll keep up with it, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you both for being here. It's really been a pleasure. And I look forward to talking to you in the coming months about what's happening next.
Thank you, Fred.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Fred.
Everyone, for joining PR Future, our podcast from USC for PR professionals by PR professionals. I'm Fred Cook, your host, and see you next time. Fight on. Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Lindsey, for joining us for what was a very interesting conversation about the future of AI and PR. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks, and fight on.